Welcome to Badmouse Classic Episode 2, Electric Horseshoealoo. Today's agenda is Lauren Southern. It's only a 5-minute video, so you should go and watch it first just to make sure that I haven't misrepresented anything she's said. Although bear in mind, it's basically everything most of you guys already know about. Classic, communism killed 90% of the world, famines, etc, etc. But I wanted to use this as a way of bringing light to more of the general criticisms I see against communism in a bit more of a... what's that? nuance? What the hell is that? So, Lauren Southern video, standard response, Badmouse avatar in front. Basically copyright Sean the Skull. Let's begin. Her main argument in the video? You can, and presumably should, still be against Antifa, because many of the subjects in Antifa subscribe to...
Now, before people freak out and say stupid things like, wow, I can't believe you're trying to excuse Nazism by pointing out there were communists on the other side, I honestly cannot fathom how people think that I'm condoning Nazism just because I acknowledge that there are more evils in the world than just Hitler.
You may not, Lauren. You may be genuine in your spiel. We all have political leanings that will influence how we view other groups, whether you like it or not. And don't worry, I know you're aware of this. You presumably lean more to the right, and I lean more to the left. This is something that I do sort of respect Lauren for, in that she's at least able to see beyond juvenile defensiveness. She will at least admit that she has leanings that do include people she might not necessarily agree with. If there's a Nazi in a group, the response is, so what? Blow me. The end goal is more important. Rather than scrambling for an excuse and being idealistic about it all, like many libertarians do.
Freedom is not free. It has to be defended. Book club Puritans piss me off so much. They just yell at you. You're a statist, you're a statist, you're a statist. Well, how are you helping the real world, dude? Like, what kind of policies are you implementing? Sorry, libertarians at reason. Yes, your ideology can and does have racists within it. The very core of liberty defends the right to be racist, no matter how much mental gymnastics you play to convince the public otherwise.
It's odd to think, but fascism is more in common with liberalism and conservatism than it does communism. I mean, sure, they both might be radical, but what they're defending is basically the status quo. It still, for example, supports property rights, as you can see in pretty much every example of fascist regimes, and it still bears a capitalist mode of production, as again, you see in literally any example. What I mean by this is that it's very easy for people to accidentally fall in line or just merely sympathise with fascists, because they ultimately defend more of what you're familiar with in comparison to us. This is because, despite some misrepresented quotes you might have seen, fascism comes about as a reaction to crises in the capitalist system. It was actually going to happen in America around the same time of Hitler under the guise of something called the Liberty League, formed by many large stockholders and tycoons, including George Bush Sr. This was a reaction to the political circumstances of the time. Some conservatives think of FDR as a borderline socialist, but he really wasn't. He said at some point in his presidency the greatest thing he managed to do was save capitalism. When the Great Depression hit, there was turmoil in the country. In Appalachia, there were literally highway robbers who stole trucks of food and supplies heading through the region. And of course, due to this and innumerable things happening, FDR came in to try and stop it. He was probably the least radical of all the positions in Washington at the time. Many folks there were actually pushing for solutions like a 30-hour work week. Imagine that, back in 1933, 30 hours a week, 6 hours a day. So Franklin got all the biggest elites around and they begrudgingly agreed to the New Deal. Begrudgingly is key word, because many of those who disagreed with him formed the Liberty League, and they would have won had it not been for the government intercepting them 3 years later and a general improvement in the economy. We've gone a bit off topic here, but my main point is, you may think that you're just being the middleman and disagreeing with both sides, and I get the overstatement of fascism you might be hearing, but we are definitely seeing certain crises of capitalism appearing, and by just conflating both extremes as wrong, it's just outright poppycock. Because you will end up giving sympathies and encouragement to one of the sides, whether you like it or not. Your spiel is definitely getting attraction from certain people who are susceptible to fascism. And even Richard Spencer has stated that people like you and Sargon and others are gateways. And when you're doing that, you might want to look at your political outlook and, I say this with a pinch of salt, check yourself. Or if not, just do what you like to do normally and admit that you lean more with fascism over communism so we can get a clear depiction of where you stand, because you're definitely not a fence-sitter.
Pointing out that both sides in a conflict can be prone to extremism and worshipping murderous dictators does not excuse the actions of the one that society judges to be worse.
You know, historically, US government has always favoured fascist regimes over communist ones, which is why they always tried to stop communism spreading at every single turn. Whether that might be through funding ContraPoints in Central America or launching coups across the globe. So don't worry, marketable society might well be skimmed slightly to the left of centre from time to time, but the government, believe it or not, is on your side. Why? Because they want to sell you goods at the lowest cost possible. And socialists, well, we don't like it when you do that, because it normally ends up with someone far, far away getting screwed over. But don't worry, Lauren, you're completely okay.
I'll give you a few examples of what actually condoning one side really looks like. Teaching it in universities as a celebrated ideology.
Now there's a funny one. Firstly, the dog whistle, or whatever you want to call it, embedded in this description is false. Socialists have no problem with personal wealth so long as it is gained through labour, as opposed to it being exploited from other folks' labour. A teacher is indeed someone who does it through their own labour. You know, they teach. They're employed after all. But the second thing about this is it's again doing that meme of implying Marxism and communism are at least active on campuses and at the greatest encouraged. Well, yeah, okay, it does in some sections of unis, I'll admit, where it's not going to be doing much to affect the establishment at all, and, you know, so long as it stays there, as Zizek has stated, it's fine for the globalists, as long as it remains there. If it exits from there, that's the problem. This is again the reason why the government has opposed communism in every single form. But for every Marxist who you can find who's a professor, who's stayed in his tenure, you can just as easily find similar folks who get ejected, especially where it actually matters, in the economics and business school, not sociology. So I take you to the case of John Sumer. He's a former blue-collar worker who, until recently, was an economics professor at the University of Vermont. He was not renewed from his position there because, well, he tried to not only teach neoclassical economics, and he tried to teach some more classical, historical, production-first-based economics lessons to his students. This isn't just Marxism, by the way, it's like loads of ranges of different schools. But he got kicked out, and this isn't just one example, it's always been a hard time to be an economics teacher and not just teach the status quo of the standard model. It holds a very small linear view of economics that is in no way as reported as much as the so-called Marxism is invading college campuses rhetoric. Ever more so because economics and business schools are far more impactful to the economy. I know from my experiences of friends who have taken economics courses in the UK that most of their classmates just go around saying, capitalism is human nature. To which I barfed. So where's that YouTube steamroller community coming in saying, universities are indoctrinating your children with neoclassical economics? Hey? Can we get that meme going? No? Yeah? Yeah, I thought not. It's just not as juicy enough, is it? It's a bit boring, that whole economics thing, you know, it's better to go on the sort of socialist views that will get all those white males bonus hard, you know? After all, what does Sumer want to teach? He wants to bring alternative models to the table, such as how globalization can promote environmental disasters. Is that really, controversial? Fuck.
Selling shirts of its leaders in pop culture stores.
Ah yes, the good old Guerrero Jericho, the most reproduced photograph in history. Obviously this is some kind of evidence towards communist infiltration in the West, except it's not. You know, part of the reason for it being so popular, apart from the fact that it's cool as fuck, is because it had no IP right attached to it. It's in the public domain. Just like Happy Birthday, yes, at long last. And Korda, by the way, never asked for any royalties for the photograph, and as of such, it flourished. The photograph has gone beyond any sort of definitive meaning. It's very, very abstract now, and mostly stands as just a cool design that can be used by firms to sell to edgy teens. This is a very common tactic of the market, appropriating trends, mediums, events, and movements of the left, the anti-capitalists, into commodities to be bought and sold. Which, and this is the funniest thing, was something that the Frankfurt School were highly critical of. But you'll never hear about that. Oh yeah, on like making designs and selling them. What the hell is base Stickman?
Cheering it on in the mainstream media when its members are going around punching innocent people.
Yeah, it's not like the left has indeed had criticism of just individual acts of violence against ordinary folks for like decades, if not centuries, including yours truly. And this is the thing, it wasn't started by us. It was started before any of our times. You may want to go back to World War I with the divvying up of the Middle East. You may want to go back to the Soviet-Afghan War and intervention via CIA backing. I told you they don't like the Reds, Lauren. Or maybe if you wanted to, you could go back to the financial crisis and the effects laid after. Because all of those events have led us to the situation we are at today. And what we do now will determine what will happen 30, 40 years into the future. Can you think of any time when there were two or more highly political groups with strongly opposed beliefs that didn't end up in brawls and barbarism? This is like... Okay, so imagine this. Imagine, if you're in a school, you have 100 people there or whatever, and you get them to just chill out, hang out, do whatever you want. And then eventually, if you come back a couple of weeks later, you will normally find one big bright spot. You will find one person who is obviously the dominant in conversation. Yeah, you get it in every school. Just go back to any of your schools, you'll find at least this one guy or gal who dominates every single discussion that you have. The Queen Bee, or King Bee, or whatever. Even if somebody who would have been Queen Bee would normally step down from that position and say, I'm not going to be as bossy or whatever today, well, instead, somebody else will then take over, and they will become the new King Bee. It happens. It's just people reflecting off the environments they're in, the situations they're in. And so it's inevitably going to happen. Do you think Charlottesville could have simply been peaceful nationalists and peaceful counter-protesters? Were you to think that this could end up as anything but a bloody mess? There's a reason people join either group. And I think if there's anything I'd like people to understand, it's that. This was inevitably going to happen. There's no way we could control it. We make history, but you get the drill.
We all know that Nazis committed atrocities that should be opposed today, and that we never want to see the return of. The crimes of Hitler are repeatedly jammed into our heads as kids by the education system, as they should be.
Yet despite being told of all the atrocities Hitler has carried out, you never actually get given, or at least I wasn't, the proper groundworks for how Hitler came to power. Case in this point, most of us think that Hitler was elected. He wasn't, for the most part. And because of this, it allows people like you to have a very minimalistic view of what the growth of fascism looks like. And it tells me that you might well have been one of those people, at least sympathizing with Hitler, because a huge amount of people did, inside and outside of Germany.
100 million people perished under communist dictators in the last century.
Watch it, Lauren, watch it! And the most common response I've gotten from that video is something along the lines of, capitalism didn't kill these people because reasons. Capitalism didn't go out and murder them, except when we did. Look, if you're killing millions of people by depriving them resources that you have, the effect is still the same. And capitalism starves and diseases tens of millions of people every year from incredibly easy problems to treat. Why? Because capitalism serves profit first, not people. It serves people as a byproduct to the fact that those people have money. Thereby, those who are not essential to the process, the externalities, profit doesn't give a shit about them. And I know what you're going to say, why can you have not true socialism, but we can't say not true capitalism? I'm not saying that. We oppose capitalism from its inherent exploitation, not its improper application. And the fact of the matter is, global capitalism has killed far, far more, regardless.
Several times over the death count racked up by the Nazis in the Second World War.
Because gassing, shooting, and purposefully starving your people is entirely comparable to not being able to feed your countries because the entire world is against you and you're in the midst of a famine, Lauren. God, why am I defending the Soviet Union? Well, desperate times, I suppose.
Try to count up how many of these horrors you ever learnt about in school. Pol Pot's killing fields in Cambodia. 2.5 million dead.
Oh, yeah, I heard that one. Mainly due to the very successful Academy Award-winning drama, The Killing Fields, which I watched as a kid.
The North Korean Gulag system. Hundreds of thousands of people are estimated to be imprisoned in horrible conditions right at this very moment.
You're in the year group below me, Lauren. Have we seriously changed the curricula so fast in that time that you were never taught anything about the North Korean prisons? I definitely remember hearing about that plenty of times, and more so in just my childhood in general, because there were about 5 documentaries about them every single year. And it's not at all privy to people's minds. Even without education, you can hear about North Korea all the time.
The Great Chinese Famine under Mao Zedong. 36 million people starved to death.
Yeah, I heard about that one. Lots and lots of times. How Mao was worse than Stalin and so forth. I heard about this, Lauren. Everyone did. Everyone basically knows that Mao is stated to have killed millions and millions of people.
The Holodomor famine in Soviet Ukraine. Between 7 to 10 million dead after food was withheld from them.
From minority kulak landowners who held over 56% of the land, yes. Now, that's one that I didn't hear in school, but what it does fit into is Stalin's overall death count, which I heard a lot about. I don't understand what you're talking about when you say people aren't taught about this stuff. I mean, sure, yes, okay, we hear about the Holocaust a lot, for very, very good reasons, but we also have it in the back of our mind that commies killed more, so they say. I fondly remember when I was 11 years old, walking through the humanities office and seeing Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin on a student-drawn infographic, with the headline of The Free Dictators. So right there then, there was a correlation between communists and fascists drilled right into my head. It remained with me for nearly a decade. And just think about this. There's a bloody good reason why you right now happen to oppose communism. If you say communism to anyone, 9 out of 10 times they'll say, nice theory, bad practice on a good day, and probably Stalin, Stalin, Stalin on every other one. If I was uploading videos like I am now, 60 years ago, I would be doing so probably in fear of my life, or at least my reputation and opportunities. You, on the other hand, would be a high flyer. There were times long ago when you could be arrested for simply trying to get people to unionize and strike, and that's because during the Cold War, as you very well know, this propaganda was fed to us, day in, day out. Just think about how much information we get told about extremist Islam, and now apply that to a superpower for over 40 years, no positives, just fear. Fear. Every single day. And that's the amount of negative information about communism you were receiving every single hour. 30 years later, we've still got a hangover, and that doesn't need to be taught even though it is. It lingers in every part of American culture. Just play a Fallout game.
I'm clearly not an infiltrator.
Commencing apprehension with deadly force!
I do remember that this is Lauren's original argument, so we must ask then, why is it that so many people today might be somewhat sympathetic to socialism? It's because socialism has a far longer history outside of just China, the USSR, and that Cambodian guy who worked for the CIA.
I'm not sure if young college students, the media, and half of the West today are ignorant, just trying to be edgy, or if they genuinely are just awful people, but I'm really hoping it's ignorance, because no one in their right mind should be celebrating the actions of communists, let alone identifying as one or defending them. You can rage in the comments as much as you want about how, Lauren, it wasn't real communism, but that won't change the fact that it results in that every single time. 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 Every single time.
There are plenty of smaller examples of socialist countries that really didn't end up in millions upon millions dead. Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso is a fabulous example. He took a country that was highly controlled from France even after decolonization, and he brought it up to the extent that it was not only able to feed all of its people self-sufficiently, but it was also able to export. He also got rid of, all those things you hate, like circumcision and forced marriages. He also had a green focus in preventing desertification. He did a huge amount for women's rights, vaccinated millions, drove literacy programs, and even removed massive privileges from government officials, including himself. So what was his downfall? He was too lenient to the opposition, which led to his Bézi killing him with the help of the French, along with all those other things he managed to accomplish. And it does not end with him. You can look at Grenada, you can look at Catalonia, the Paris Commune, Hungarian Commune, Seychelles, the autonomous zone of Xinmin in Manchuria, the Zapatistas of Chiapas, Yugoslavia, the Rajavan experiment, the list goes on. You can go to India and find strong tenets of socialism. You can go to Nepal and find strong tenets of communism. And it's not even mentioning other things like radical unions like the IWW pushing for stronger worker rights. This is not millions of people starving to death, Lauren. And if you want millions of people starving to death, or just living in abject misery, then look no further than every single country that the United States has intervened over the past 60 or 70 years, if not longer than that. Because that right there is capitalism. The congloms supported the government all the way. They wanted to secure their profits. Look at the fact that the poverty rate, contrary to popular belief, is not going up. They just keep on lowering the quota. But of course, I'm sure you just say, that's the globalist fault, eh? And then, you must ask yourself the question, Lauren. Were you taught any of this in school?
They say the mark of insanity is repeating the same thing again and again and again with the same result and yet expecting a different one.
But they didn't just do the exact same thing, Lauren. And they didn't just get the same result, did they? This is why socialists have continuously looked back at previous examples of their failed attempts and they've adapted them, they've analysed and thought of ways to solve them. As an example, the first attempt at building socialism was the Paris Commune, and their biggest failure was that they allowed the external powers to become too powerful. They adapted from this, and thus better attempts occurred.
If you start assaulting people because they disagree with you, you shouldn't be praised, you should be thrown in a cold, dark jail cell.
What, like a North Korean gulag? So in conclusion, I'll finish up with this. There's a common argument that communism led to horrendous results, but capitalism has led to amazing results. But it's pretty damn petty when people like Lauren only pick from the oldest attempts at socialism. I'd like to offer, as Lauren puts it herself, nuance to the discussion. The USA is undoubtedly the strongest proponent of the capitalist system in the world, and is indeed the most powerful. But how capitalism came to flourish in America is no act of evolution or our natural state. It only really managed to do so because, quite simply, it was in the single greatest position for it to become as such. It's mostly geography and it's mostly chance. When the settlers arrived in America, they didn't find much in the way of old-world commodities like gold and silver. Instead, they found vast amounts of arable land fit for farming, cotton and tobacco in the south, fishing and shipping in New England, and a food economy in the middle. And this would provide ample growth for what the world was soon to become, a commodities game. By chance, France had a revolution, and they were able to buy lots of land off Napoleon so he could fund his war in Europe, giving America, again, more and more land, and they eventually got California and the northern states and so on and so forth. In addition to this, America could not be invaded. They had one war with the British in the War of 1812, and that didn't really do much in terms of anyone's economy. In the north, you had, well, your country, with, as I'm sure you're aware, relatively little room for agriculture and not as much habitable land, which despite Canada being huge, most people just live along this line. I'm sorry Canada, I love you and will be visiting you soon. In the south, you had Latin America. This land was rich in all-world resources, particularly gold and silver, which the Spanish and Portuguese loved. They shipped tons and tons and tons of this back home, and so South America's infrastructure was not built for the arrival of the industrial age. It was in effect a big mining basket for the old world. And so when the bourgeois elite of the southern and central areas had their revolutions, they were not in any way on the same playing field that North America had for nearly 200 years. In fact, if the Civil War ended in armistice, then you can pretty much imagine that there would not be as much stability in the USA as there is today. And you would not see the United States becoming as big a superpower as it has been able to do so. Mainly due to the fact that they've also got to defend themselves pretty damn well. If you remove the USA from the map, capitalism would have developed very, very differently. And you might well have looked at Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and other nations and thought, damn, capitalism really isn't showing good signs over there, is it? Not to mention that it took 100 years for the United States to really develop itself to anywhere near the ranks of the British Empire. So what I'm really saying is this: it's not fair to compare nations with completely different conditions and say that because one succeeded, that is in of itself a reason enough to dismiss the other. We do, as socialists, indeed accept and even admit that capitalism has done well in building immense infrastructure in our modern world. But that does not mean that we like it or condone what it does outside of that. It's easy to go and blame socialism for all the problems caused in those areas, but what we ignore is that a huge amount of it was because of lack of infrastructure necessary for thriving. You change the situations and infrastructure over there, and suddenly the line of history flows differently. Capitalism is the definition of survivor bias. It has survived because it was in the right conditions for its survival. Its hegemony dominates our modern understandings, our politics, our schools, our culture for generations. And now, here's me offering a few minutes to try and dismiss that.